The Krager scout team landed their sleek, angular vessels on the outskirts of the human colony, their predatory eyes scanning the unfamiliar landscape. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, a far cry from the barren, desolate worlds the Krager were accustomed to hunting on. Captain Troth, a seasoned veteran of countless bloody campaigns, disembarked first, his powerful clawed feet leaving deep impressions in the soft soil. He stretched his towering muscular frame, relishing the prospect of the coming hunt. The Krager were the apex predators of the known galaxy. Their physical prowess, cunning, and sheer ruthlessness had made them the stuff of nightmares for countless civilizations. "Prepare the hunting party," Troth rumbled, his deep, guttural voice carrying an undercurrent of barely contained anticipation. "These humans will make a fine addition to our trophies." The other Krager warriors, each standing well over 2 meters tall with thick, armored hides and razor-sharp talons, quickly fell into formation behind their leader. They carried an array of fearsome hunting implements: long, serrated blades, barbed spears, and deadly plasma cannons that could vaporize a target in the blink of an eye. As the hunting party set out towards the distant human settlement, Troth could feel his blood beginning to simmer with the thrill of the chase. His kind had decimated countless species across the stars, and he saw no reason why these humans would prove any different. They were a young, untested race. How could they possibly hope to stand against the might of the Krager? The scout team moved swiftly and silently, their heavy footfalls muffled by the lush vegetation. Troth held up a massive clawed hand, signaling his warriors to halt as they approached the colony's perimeter. Through the trees, they could see the modest dwellings of the human settlers, their technology primitive and unfamiliar to the Krager's eyes. "Scatter and observe," Troth commanded, his tone low and ruthless. "Learn their weaknesses, their habits. Then we will strike and feast upon their terror." The Krager fanned out, melting into the shadows of the alien forest, their predatory gazes fixed upon the unsuspecting human colony. For hours, they watched and waited, studying the patterns of the settlers' daily routines, looking for any vulnerabilities they could exploit. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Troth felt a growing sense of unease. The humans seemed far more organized and vigilant than the Krager had anticipated. They moved with a sense of purpose, their interactions marked by a clear chain of command and discipline. This was no ragtag collection of hapless prey, but a community of survivors, hardened by the challenges of establishing a foothold on a distant alien world. Troth's talons flexed in frustration, and he let out a low, rumbling growl. No matter. The Krager would simply have to adapt their tactics accordingly. These humans may have proven more resilient than expected, but in the end, they were still no match for the galaxy's deadliest hunters. As night fell, the Krager scouts moved in closer, their glowing crimson eyes piercing the darkness. They would wait for the opportune moment to strike, when the human settlement was most vulnerable. Troth could already taste the fear and desperation of their prey, feel the warm, salty tang of their blood on his tongue. The hunt had begun. The first wave of Krager attacks came under the cover of night, their stealthy approach masking the deadly intent of the alien predators. Troth led the charge, his massive frame crashing through the undergrowth as his warriors fanned out around the perimeter of the human colony. To the Krager's surprise, the humans were quick to respond. Bright spotlights suddenly flooded the darkness, illuminating the invading force in a blaze of unforgiving light. Shouts and the sound of weapons fire rent the air as the colonial militia sprang into action, their organized defense catching the Krager off guard. Troth snarled in frustration as one of his warriors fell, a smoking hole burned through its armored chest by a precisely aimed shot. The humans' technology was more advanced than the Krager had anticipated, their firearms capable of penetrating even the toughest Krager hide. Rallying his remaining forces, Troth pressed the assault, his warriors unleashing a barrage of plasma fire that scorched the ground and sent the human colonists scrambling for cover. But for every Krager that fell, 2 more humans took their place, their determination and discipline never wavering. The battle raged on through the night, the sounds of combat echoing across the colony. Troth's claws dripped with the blood of his victims, but the humans refused to yield, their tenacity wearing down the Krager's numbers and morale. As the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, Troth was forced to order a retreat, his warriors limping back to their vessels with heavy hearts. The Krager had never known defeat like this before. Their prey had fought with a ferocity that defied all logic. Back aboard his ship, Troth paced the dimly lit corridors, his mind racing. How could these humans, these primitive colonists, have stood against the might of the Krager? Their weapons, their tactics, their sheer will to survive. It was all so foreign, so utterly unexpected. The Krager captain struggled to make sense of it all. His kind had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, their fearsome reputation preceding them wherever they went. But here, on this remote human outpost, that reputation had been shattered, their invincibility called into question. Troth knew he could not return to his homeworld with tales of defeat. The Krager High Command would never tolerate such a humiliation, and he would likely be stripped of his rank and exiled in disgrace. No, he had to find a way to redeem himself, to prove the superiority of the Krager once and for all. Summoning his remaining warriors, Troth laid out a new plan of attack. They would observe the humans more closely, study their weaknesses, and then strike with even greater force. This time, they would be prepared for the humans' unexpected tenacity and technological prowess. Over the next few days, the Krager scouts fanned out, their crimson eyes vigilantly scanning the colony for any vulnerabilities. They watched as the human settlers fortified their defenses, erecting new barriers and deploying additional armed patrols. The Krager were impressed, despite their reluctance to admit it. As Troth pored over the reconnaissance data, a growing sense of unease began to take root in the pit of his stomach. These humans were proving to be far more resilient and adaptable than the Krager had ever encountered before. Their ability to rapidly counter the alien predators' tactics was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The Krager captain could not escape the nagging suspicion that he and his warriors may have underestimated their prey. The humans were no longer just a challenge to be overcome. They were a genuine threat, one that the Krager might not be able to vanquish as easily as they had so many others. Troth clenched his talons, his mind grappling with a realization that was as unthinkable as it was undeniable. These humans, these fragile-looking creatures, might just be worthy adversaries after all. As the Krager's hunt dragged on, their frustration and bewilderment only grew. Try as they might, the alien predators could not seem to gain the upper hand against the human colonists. Troth watched in dismay as his warriors' attacks were repeatedly repelled, the humans adapting their tactics and technology with startling speed. Wherever the Krager turned, they found their prey had already anticipated their moves, ready to counter with overwhelming force. The human defenders demonstrated an unbreakable will, their determination to protect their home fueling their relentless resistance. Time and again, Troth witnessed his comrades fall to well-aimed gunfire, their agonized roars echoing through the night. The Krager captain could scarcely believe his eyes. These humans, these seemingly fragile creatures, were proving to be far more formidable than anyone could have imagined. Their ability to learn and evolve their defenses was nothing short of astonishing. Troth found himself growing increasingly uneasy, a creeping sense of dread taking hold in the pit of his stomach. The Krager had never faced an adversary quite like this before, one that refused to be cowed by their savage might, that seemed to grow stronger with each passing battle. The human colonists fought with a ferocity that belied their apparent weakness. Their weapons, though primitive compared to the Krager's advanced technology, were wielded with deadly precision. And their tactics, honed by the trials of establishing a foothold on this distant world, were adaptable and unpredictable. Troth's talons flexed in frustration as he watched yet another of his warriors fall, their lifeless body crumpling to the ground. The Krager were renowned for their ruthless efficiency, their ability to overwhelm and destroy any foe that dared to cross their path. And yet, Here they were, being steadily worn down by these stubborn, unyielding humans. The captain could not shake the growing sense that the tables had turned, that the hunters had become the hunted. Their confidence, once so absolute, had been shaken to its core. The Conquerors were no longer the unstoppable force they had always believed themselves to be. As the battle raged on, Troth found himself increasingly doubtful of his ability to lead his warriors to victory. The humans' tenacity, their willingness to adapt and evolve, was proving to be a formidable obstacle that the Conquerors simply could not overcome. The captain's mind raced, searching desperately for a way to turn the tide. But no matter how he analyzed the situation, no matter how he adjusted their tactics, the humans seemed to be one step ahead, their defenses impenetrable. Troth's frustration gave way to a deep sense of unease, a creeping realization that perhaps, just perhaps, these humans were not the easy prey the Conquerors had assumed them to be. They were not simply hapless victims to be slaughtered, but formidable adversaries worthy of the Conquerors' respect. As the sun began to set on another day of bitter combat, Troth found himself facing a question he never thought he would have to ponder. What if the Conquerors were not the undisputed masters of the galaxy after all? The thought was as unsettling as it was humbling, and Troth knew that he could no longer ignore the implications. These humans, these unexpected warriors, had challenged the very foundations of the Conquerors' belief in their own invincibility. And as the captain stared out into the darkening sky, he knew that he and his kind would never be the same again. Perplexed by the humans' tenacity, Troth retired to his ship's command deck, his massive frame sinking into the familiar padded chair. He sat in brooding silence, replaying the events of the past few days in his mind, searching for any clue, any weakness, that could turn the tide of this increasingly one-sided battle. The Conqueror captain had never encountered prey quite like these humans before. Their ability to adapt and counter the alien predators' tactics was nothing short of astonishing. No matter how Troth and his warriors pressed the assault, the humans seemed to be one step ahead, their defenses fortifying with each new wave of attacks. Troth ran a clawed hand over his scared, armored hide, his crimson eyes narrowing in contemplation. These humans were no mere primitives, no easy targets for the Conquerors' savage might. They were survivors, hardened by the challenges of establishing a foothold on this distant world, their determination fueled by an unbreakable will to protect their home. The captain's mandibles clicked together in a gesture of unease as he considered the implications. If these humans, this seemingly insignificant colony, could withstand the full force of the Conquerors' assault, what did that say about the rest of their kind? Were there more settlements, more pockets of human resistance, scattered across the galaxy, just waiting to be discovered? Troth felt a growing sense of trepidation at the thought. The Conquerors had long reigned supreme, their fearsome reputation preceding them wherever they went. But now, that reputation was being called into question, challenged by the very prey they had so carelessly underestimated. The captain's claws clenched around the arms of his chair as he grappled with this unsettling revelation. The Conquerors were the scourge of the galaxy, the apex predators that had dominated the stars for millennia. And yet, here they were, being slowly worn down by a species they had dismissed as little more than a nuisance. Troth felt a twinge of resentment towards these humans, these unexpected adversaries who dared to defy the Conquerors' might. How dare they challenge the natural order, the unassailable dominance of his kind? It was an affront to everything the Conquerors stood for, a blow to their very sense of identity. And yet, even as the captain's anger simmered, a small, nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered a different truth. Perhaps, just perhaps, these humans were not the weak, insignificant prey he had assumed them to be. Perhaps they were worthy adversaries, a force to be reckoned with in their own right. Troth shook his head, as if to dislodge the very thought. Such heresy was unthinkable, a betrayal of everything the Conqueror believed in. And yet, the more he considered it, the more the captain found himself unable to deny the growing sense of respect, even admiration, that was taking root within him. These humans, with their unbreakable spirit, and their relentless adaptability had challenged the very foundations of the Krager's worldview. They had shaken Troth's confidence, forcing him to confront the possibility that his kind, for all their vaunted might, were not truly invincible after all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and red, the Krager captain made a decision. He could no longer afford to underestimate these humans, nor could he continue to throw his warriors at them in a futile attempt to assert the Krager's dominance. With a heavy heart, Troth issued a new order to his scouts: retreat. The captain knew that this was not a decision to be made lightly, that it would be seen as a grave dishonor by his kind. But he also knew that continuing this hopeless assault would only lead to further devastation, a fate he was no longer willing to risk. As the Krager ships lifted off from the human colony, Troth stared out the viewport, his gaze fixed on the diminishing form of the settlement. In that moment, he knew that his life, and the lives of his warriors, would never be the same. For the first time in their history, the Krager had been humbled, their unwavering confidence shaken to the core, and Troth could not help but wonder what other surprises this strange, new species might have in store for them. When the Krager attempted a final desperate assault, the human defenders unleashed a devastating counterattack that caught the alien invaders off guard. Troth led the charge, his massive frame crashing through the underbrush as his warriors fanned out around the perimeter of the colony. The Krager had learned from their previous encounters, adapting their tactics and utilizing a more coordinated approach. But the humans were ready. Bright spotlights suddenly flooded the darkness, illuminating the Krager force in a blaze of unforgiving light. Shouts and the cacophony of weapons fire rent the air as the colonial militia sprang into action, their organized defense quickly overwhelming the alien predators. Troth roared in fury as he saw his warriors falling all around him, their bodies crumpling to the ground amidst a hail of plasma bolts and high-velocity projectiles. The humans' advanced technology, combined with their unwavering discipline, proved to be a devastating combination. Despite the Krager's best efforts, they found themselves being steadily pushed back, their savage onslaught blunted by the human defenders' relentless counterattack. Troth's claws dripped with the blood of his comrades, but for every Krager that fell, 2 more humans took their place, their determination never wavering. The battle raged on, the very ground shaking with the intensity of the clash. Troth could feel his confidence beginning to crumble, the realization dawning that the humans were no longer the easy prey he had once believed them to be. As the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, the Krager captain knew that they had been outmatched, outmaneuvered, and outmatched. His warriors, once the scourge of the galaxy, were now in full retreat, their once formidable numbers decimated by the human colonists' fierce resistance. Troth felt a bitter taste of defeat in his mouth as he watched his battered forces limp back to their ships, their tails tucked between their legs. The Krager had never known such humiliation, such utter and complete failure. Their reputation as the deadliest hunters in the universe had been shattered, their invincibility called into question. As the Krager vessels lifted off from the human colony, Troth sat in brooding silence, his crimson eyes narrowed in a mixture of rage and disbelief. How could this have happened? How could the Krager, the apex predators of the galaxy, have been so thoroughly and comprehensively defeated by these seemingly insignificant humans? The captain's talons flexed, his claws digging into the armrests of his chair as he grappled with the implications of this devastating loss. The Krager had never before encountered an adversary capable of withstanding their savage onslaught, let alone one that could so utterly and completely shatter their dominance. Troth knew that he could not return to his homeworld with tales of this defeat. The Krager High Command would never tolerate such a humiliation, and he would likely be stripped of his rank and exiled in disgrace. No, he had to find a way to redeem himself, to prove the superiority of his kind once and for all. But as the Krager ships sped away from the human colony, Troth could not shake the growing sense of unease that had taken root in the pit of his stomach. These humans, these unexpected warriors, had challenged everything the Krager had ever known, forcing them to confront the possibility that their vaunted might was not as unassailable as they had always believed. The captain knew that he and his kind would never be the same again. The scars of this defeat would run deep, a painful reminder that even the most fearsome of predators could be humbled by the sheer tenacity and adaptability of their prey. As the Krager vessels disappeared into the vast expanse of space, Troth could not help but wonder what other surprises the human race might have in store for them. One thing was certain: the Krager would never underestimate their new adversaries again. The battered Krager scout team fled the human colony, their vessels streaking through the void of space as they carried tales of their harrowing experience back to their homeworld. Troth, the once proud captain, sat in grim silence, his crimson eyes fixed on the distant stars. As the ships approached the familiar territories of the Krager Empire, the sense of dread within Troth only grew. He knew that the news of their defeat would spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of controversy and recrimination within the Krager High Command. True to his fears, the response was swift and unforgiving. Troth and his warriors were summoned to the council chambers, their tattered armor and weary expressions only serving to further infuriate the assembled elders. "Explain yourselves," roared the warlord, his massive frame towering over the returned scouts. How could the mighty Krager be defeated by these puny human settlers? Troth swallowed hard, his mandibles clicking together as he struggled to find the words to describe the sheer ferocity and adaptability of their prey. They were unlike anything we had ever faced before, he rumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Their weapons, their tactics, their will to survive, it was all so unexpected, so foreign to us. The other Krager warriors murmured in agreement, their own expressions a mixture of shame and disbelief. They had been the scourge of the galaxy, their fearsome reputation preceding them wherever they went. And yet here they were, having been humbled by a species they had so casually dismissed as insignificant. The warlord's eyes narrowed to slits, his claws flexing dangerously. "Excuses," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You have brought disgrace upon our entire species. The humans should have been easy prey, ripe for the taking. And yet you returned with your tails between your legs, like cowards." Troth stood his ground, his own pride and honor refusing to let him cower before the warlord's wrath. "They were not as weak as we had assumed," he growled, his tone laced with grudging respect. "These humans, they fought with a ferocity and determination that we have never before encountered. They adapted to our tactics, overwhelmed us with their advanced technology and discipline." The other elders murmured in disbelief, their own confidence in the Krager's superiority shaken by Troth's words. For countless generations, they had believed themselves to be the undisputed masters of the galaxy, their savage might unmatched by any other species. But now, that belief was being challenged, and they did not know how to respond. Tension hung thick in the air as the Krager Council debated the implications of this defeat. Some, like the warlord, were quick to dismiss it as an anomaly, a fluke that could easily be rectified. Others, however, began to entertain the unthinkable, the possibility that the humans might actually be a force to be reckoned with. Troth watched the proceedings in silence, his own mind racing with the implications of what he had witnessed. These humans, these unexpected adversaries, had shattered the Krager's sense of invincibility, forcing them to confront the reality that their dominance was not as absolute as they had always believed. As the debate dragged on, the warlord finally raised a clawed hand, silencing the hall. "Enough," he growled, his eyes fixing Troth with a look of pure contempt. "We will not tolerate this weakness, this betrayal of our very nature. The humans will be destroyed, and their colony will be razed to the ground." Troth felt a chill run down his spine at the warlord's words. He knew that the other elders would not dare to challenge the decree, that the Krager would soon be mobilizing the full might of their forces to crush the human settlement once and for all. And yet, even as he nodded in acquiescence, a small part of Troth could not help but wonder if such a course of action was truly wise. These humans had proven themselves to be far more resilient and adaptable than anyone could have imagined, and the Krager captain could not shake the unsettling feeling that underestimating them once more might have devastating consequences. As the council adjourned, Throth found himself torn between his loyalty to his species and the growing respect he had developed for their unexpected adversaries. The Krager had dominated the galaxy for millennia, their fearsome reputation unmatched. But now, that reputation had been shattered, and Throth could not help but wonder what other surprises the human race might have in store for them. Fearing the wrath of the humans, the Krager High Command issued a strict edict. No Krager was to ever set foot on a human-occupied world again. The species that was once the scourge of the galaxy now viewed humanity with a mixture of awe, respect, and outright terror. Throth, the once proud captain who had led the ill-fated assault on the human colony, found himself at the center of the brewing storm within Krager society. His accounts of the humans' ferocity and adaptability had ignited a fierce debate among the elders, with some calling for a more cautious, measured approach, while others remained steadfast in their desire for vengeance. The warlord, however, remained unwavering in his decree. He had been deeply shaken by the news of the Krager's defeat, his confidence in their superiority shaken to the core. In his eyes, the humans represented a dangerous threat, one that needed to be eradicated before they could grow strong enough to challenge the Krager's dominance. As the warlord rallied his forces, Throth found himself increasingly isolated within his own society. His fellow warriors, once bound to him by unbreakable loyalty, now eyed him with suspicion and distrust. They saw his reluctance to launch a full-scale assault on the human colony as a betrayal of their very identity as Krager. Throth tried to reason with them, to explain the true extent of the threat that the humans posed, but his words fell on deaf ears. The Krager were a proud, stubborn species, and the thought of being humbled by their prey was simply too much for them to bear. Resigned to his fate, Throth watched as the warlord's forces mobilized, their massive warships casting long shadows over the colony worlds they passed. He knew that the impending clash would be a decisive one, a battle that would determine the fate of both the Krager and the human race. As the Krager armada drew closer to the human settlement, Throth felt a growing sense of unease. The warlord's strategy was one of pure, overwhelming force, a tactic that had served the Krager well in the past. But deep down, Throth couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that it might not be enough to overcome the humans' tenacity and adaptability. The captain's claws flexed in anticipation as the Krager ships closed in on their target, the colony's defenses lighting up with a barrage of plasma fire. But to Throth's dismay, the human resistance proved even more formidable than before, their weaponry and tactics having been further refined and strengthened in the wake of the previous battle. The ensuing clash was savage and brutal, the very sky alight with the fury of the Krager's assault. But try as they might, the alien invaders found themselves once again being steadily pushed back, their vaunted superiority crumbling in the face of the humans' unwavering determination. Throth watched in horror as the warlord's forces were decimated, their numbers dwindling with each passing moment. The captain's own warriors fought with the ferocity of cornered beasts, their desperation fueling their attacks. But it was all for naught, as the human defenders refused to yield, their defenses an impenetrable wall against the Krager's might. As the battle drew to a close, the battered Krager ships were forced to retreat, their tails firmly tucked between their legs. Throth sat in the command chair of his vessel, his crimson eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. The Krager, the scourge of the galaxy, had been humbled once again. Their reputation, once unassailable, now lay in tatters, their very identity as the undisputed masters of the cosmos called into question. Throth knew that he would never be able to return to his homeworld, not after the shame and humiliation he had endured. The warlord and the other elders would never forgive him for his perceived weakness, his reluctance to crush the human colony with the full force of the Krager's might. And so the once proud captain found himself adrift, a pariah within his own society. He had seen the true power of the human race, their ferocity and adaptability, and he knew that the Krager could no longer afford to underestimate them. As the Krager ships disappeared into the vast expanse of space, Croth couldn't help but wonder what the future held for his kind. Would they ever be able to regain their former glory, their unquestioned dominance over the galaxy? Or had the humans, these unexpected adversaries, forever altered the balance of power in the stars? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. The Krager would never look upon the human race with the same casual disregard again. Their respect, and perhaps even their fear, had been irrevocably earned. In the years that followed, the Krager's avoidance of human space became legendary. Other alien civilizations took note, realizing that the most fearsome predator in the universe had been humbled by the sheer ferocity and adaptability of the human race. Humanity's reputation as a force to be reckoned with spread throughout the galaxy. Throth, the former Krager captain who had led the ill-fated assaults on the human colony, found himself an outcast among his own kind. His warnings of the dangers posed by the humans had fallen on deaf ears, and the warlord and his ilk had dismissed him as a coward, unfit to bear the mantle of a true Krager warrior. Stripped of his rank and exiled from Krager society, Throth wandered the stars, a lone observer of the shifting tides that were sweeping through the galaxy. He watched as other alien civilizations, once confident in their ability to stand against the Krager's might, now eyed the human colonies with a mixture of trepidation and awe. The tales of the humans' ferocity in battle, their unwavering determination, and their rapid technological advancement had spread like wildfire. Throth heard whispers of entire worlds that had fallen to the human onslaught, their once proud defenders crushed beneath the weight of the newcomers' relentless assault. The former captain found himself torn between a deep sense of foreboding and a growing admiration for the human race. He had witnessed firsthand the devastation they could unleash, the way they could adapt and overcome even the most formidable of adversaries. And yet, he could not help but feel a twinge of respect for their sheer tenacity and resilience. As Throth drifted from system to system, he began to piece together a tapestry of the humans' rising power. They were forging alliances, expanding their reach, and demonstrating a strategic acumen that belied their relative youth as a galactic power. The Krager, once the undisputed masters of the cosmos, were now forced to tread carefully, their every move scrutinized by these unexpected rivals. Throth could not help but wonder what the future held for both his own kind and the humans. Would the two species find a way to coexist, to perhaps even forge an alliance? Or would their inevitable clash of civilizations lead to a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy? The former captain's thoughts were interrupted by a distress signal, a frantic plea for help from a distant colony. Without hesitation, Throth altered course, his vessel speeding towards the source of the transmission. As he drew closer, he could see the telltale signs of a Krager assault, the colony's defenses battered and crumbling. Throth's claws flexed in anticipation, a part of him yearning to rush to the aid of his fellow Krager. But the memories of his own defeat, the crushing humiliation he had endured, stayed his hand. He knew all too well the futility of underestimating the human race, and he was not about to make the same mistake again. Instead, Throth chose a different course of action. He transmitted a coded message, alerting the nearby human colonies to the Krager's attack. Within moments, he could see the telltale flare of spacecraft engines, the human defenders rushing to the aid of their distant kin. As Throth watched the ensuing battle, he could not help but feel a sense of profound respect for the humans' unwavering loyalty and protective instincts. They fought with a ferocity that matched the Krager's own, their advanced technology and disciplined tactics proving to be an overwhelming force. The former captain observed the clash in silence, his crimson eyes narrowed in contemplation. He had once been the scourge of the galaxy, the apex predator that had dominated the stars for millennia. But now he found himself in awe of these unexpected adversaries, these humans who had risen to challenge the very foundations of the Krager's dominance. In the end, the Krager invaders were driven off, their tails firmly tucked between their legs. Throth watched as the human ships returned to their colony, their victorious crews celebrated by the grateful settlers. And in that moment, the former captain knew that the balance of power in the galaxy had been forever altered. The Kragor, once the undisputed masters of the cosmos, were now viewed with a mixture of respect and fear by the other alien civilizations. Their reputation as the galaxy's deadliest hunters had been shattered, their invincibility called into question by the sheer tenacity and adaptability of the human race. As Stroth set a course for the unknown, he could not help but wonder what other surprises the humans might have in store. One thing was certain. The Kragor would never again underestimate their newfound rivals, for to do so would be to invite their own destruction. The former captain's legacy, once one of savage conquest and unquestioned dominance, had been forever transformed. Humanity's rise to power had not only humbled the Kragor, but had also reshaped the very fabric of the galaxy itself. And Troth, once a proud warrior, now found himself a witness to the dawn of a new era, one in which the humans had firmly established themselves as a force to be reckoned with.